in the early days of Big Finish, in the early 2000s, they started a series called Doctor Who Unbound, and it's basically Doctor Who meets Twilight Zone, where we've got these like alternate realities, like what if Susan never left Gallifrey? What if Doctor Who was literally a fictional production, and Derek Jacobi has to finally get it written and get it done, and all of these other things. Some encounters with the Brigadier, the Unbound Doctor is David Warner, all of these weird out there experimental stuff from the early days of Big Finish. And recently, they've announced a return to the What If Doctor Who universe with Doctor of War 1 Genesis. They've got a sequel coming out in September, Unbound Doctor of War 2 Destiny, and the first release, Genesis, came out this past month. And basically, Unbound Doctor of War, the setup, the inciting incident, shall we say, is that it starts at Genesis of the Daleks with Tom Baker reprising his role, Sadie Miller as Sarah Jane Smith, played by the late great Elizabeth Sladen. We also got Christopher Naylor as Harry Sullivan as well, that TARDIS trio in the story, recreating the end of Genesis of the Daleks, except this time the Fourth Doctor decides he does have the right, he's going to touch those two strands of wires together, destroy the incubator rooms, and he's going to fulfill his mission for the Time Lords. And the consequences, the fallout from that, creates its entire new what-if dimension where the Fourth Doctor finds himself returned back to Gallifrey, warped back, and Sarah Jane, Harry are killed on Skaro, the Time Ring is left behind there, and the Fourth Doctor decides he needs to regenerate into a new body to fight in the Time War. Because, basically, if you try and actually succeed in destroying one opposing faction in a time war, aka the Daleks, it messes up the timeline somewhat. So the Fourth Doctor drinks the elixir from the Sisterhood of Khan, although the Sisterhood of Khan have been killed in the Time War, but the elixir still remains, and he regenerates into the Doctor of War, not John Hurt, but Colin Baker. So he basically skips Peter Davison. That is maybe Unbound Doctor of War 3, The Lost Incarnation or something, I don't know. And if that sounds like a really, really interesting premise, what if the Sixth Doctor was the War Doctor, Colin Baker was the War Doctor, and because of the altered ending, the altered results at the end of Genesis of the Daleks, because he was scooped out of Skaro instead of using the time ring to get back, the Daleks have the time ring, which means they're able to master time travel significantly earlier into their lifespan, into their history, meaning that they basically win the Time War before it's even started. Now, if that sounds really, really interesting, and it sounds like there's some great story possibilities, some great characters to explore, you might find Genesis Unbound Doctor of War a little bit disappointing. But let's play a clip here where the Colin Baker as the War Doctor, otherwise known as the Warrior, or the Doctor that was, as he's known on Skaro, talking to a member of the Celestial Intervention Agency about the morality of meddling.
Do we intervene when necessary? Yes. To ensure that no one, and I do mean no one, is able to interfere with the proper order of things.
And by proper order, you mean the one you define?
Of course.
So tell me, what if you're wrong?
We aren't.
No?
Time is governed by the superior race, Doctor. It is for them to decide what is and what is not the proper order of things, to protect that timeline and to ensure that no rogue agents are permitted to meddle.
I never meddle.
With respect, that's all you've ever done.
Is that so? You think it's an easy choice? To weigh all the harm the Daleks could do, would do, without my intervention, against the cost of eradicating them from the universe altogether? The harm to the universe, against the harm to one's own soul? Yes, I destroyed the incubators, and if it was necessary, I would do it again. And again. And again.
So as you probably heard from that clip, and the undisputed best thing about Doctor of War Unbound, Doctor of War 1, Genesis, lengthy title, Colin Baker is absolutely superb in this release, embodying a much more sardonic Doctor, a much more violent Doctor who's okay with killing, who's okay with his moral code being completely upended because of the Time War. However, I found this to be a very disappointing release, because Doctor of War, Genesis, is significantly much more interested in laying the groundwork for this alternate Time War, and then spending about 3 hours, because this is the 3-part box set story, this is a 3-part story here, Dust Devil by John Dorney, Aftershocks by Lou Morgan, The Difference Office by James Kettle. This is a story that spends roughly about 3 hours, basically trying to justify and explain the paradoxes, trying to explain alternate timelines, trying to explore a divergent timeline where the 6th Doctor with Peri knows that this change is happening and tries to, avoid assassination, and he tries to figure out what's happening with this future that he doesn't know about with members of the Celestial Intervention Agency. It tries to figure out the hows and the whats and the whys, rather than just immersing the audience, the listener, into this alternate time war. There was a really interesting moment in the Aftershocks, which is part 2 by Lou Morgan, the behind the scenes, the interviews afterwards, where I think it's director Barnaby Kay, or one of the producers, is talking about it after they received the script. They were like, yeah, it's really complicated. It's really complicated. Really difficult to understand. Really complicated. And I'm kind of confused why it wasn't at that moment they realised, hold up, wait a minute, let's backtrack a bit. Can we streamline this at all? And can we just tell this alternate time war story? It's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario, because the folks over at Big Finish have done a lot of stuff in the Time War. They've got 2 War Doctors with John Hurt and Jonathan Carley. They've got Master, like the War Master in there as well. They've got the 8th Doctor in the Time War. The 5th Doctor has technically been involved in the Time War as well with Shadow of the Daleks. There's a lot of Time War stuff. An awful lot. However, I still think that they could have found new and interesting things for them to do with the Time War in this setting, because it's an alternate Time War where the Daleks basically win very early on. It's really confusing when you're hopping from story to story as well. There's no, even though this is a 3-parter, even though this is a trilogy, Dust Devil, the first one, doesn't have a cliffhanger which leads into Aftershocks. Aftershocks doesn't have a cliffhanger which leads into The Difference Office. Instead, there's 3 different timelines happening where Aftershock ends, and then The Difference Office opens with a years later time jump, and all of a sudden, not a spoiler, it's in the plot, synopsis in the blurb, the Warrior, the 6th Doctor, the Colin Baker, is now president of the Time Lords at the beginning of the 3rd story, and we have no idea how he became president, we have no idea what happened in the interim. It's okay, he's president now. Let's figure out the paradoxes. No, I'd rather just know, how does this alternate time war allow the Warrior, Colin Baker's Doctor, to become the president, and then what happens there? And because we're just dropped into these alternate settings and no time to learn about who the characters are or these different alternating versions, for example, you've got these great casting decisions. You've got Sanjeev Bhaskar as the new Barusa, terrific actor, you've probably seen him on TV and film, great actor, great talent. He's the new Barusa, and he has nothing interesting to do. Why cast him as Barusa in a version of Barusa that feels so flat? You get Rebecca Knight as a new version of Romana, the War Romana, and she's just a non-entity character-wise. About 2/3 of the way into The Difference Office, the Warrior is talking to Romana, and it's oh, so you two do know each other. That would have been nice to know literally before the 40-minute mark in the 60-minute story. It feels like it's such a waste of potential. You've got so much interesting character stuff, so much interesting stories that you can tell in this alternate time war with this new renegade warrior, this new one who's been born out of a different type of fire and a different type of guilt. And instead of dealing with that and diving into it, it's just, okay, how do we figure out the logistics of this paradox? And it's the most boring part of it. It's the most boring part of any alternate what if. It would be if For example, Days of Future Past, the X-Men story, is less about, this alternate history, this alternate future, and it's more about quantum theory and Schrodinger's cat. Conceptually interesting, but there's no story there. Like, this is a 3-part box set, and there's very little actual story. It's busy work, it's homework. It feels like homework listening to it. I honestly found it a really unengaging listen, kind of across the board, really. I think Aftershocks by Lou Morgan is the best one, because it kind of goes a little bit more experimental, and also Jeffrey Beavers is the master, in this version's War Master, shall we say. And it's really a great performance, where he's sort of like the devil on the Doctor's shoulder. They sort of like collaborate with each other. The Doctor is on trial in the second story, and Jeffrey Beavers' master is his defense. There's some really great interactions, some really fun black comedy there, and Jeffrey Beavers is wonderful version of the Master. Like, in the last box set I listened to with the Master, the solo Fourth Doctor one, I was suitably reminded about how boring the Master can be without a good performance behind it. But Jeffrey Beavers is just so, like, hamming it up and really slimy, but really, like, this is like I don't want to say the Joker, but it's like, this is an incarnation that's thriving on the chaos of this brand new time war. But, like, the plot synopsis for Aftershock: the ripples are spreading out, the warrior is on trial, or is he? No one's willing to tell him his crime, so how can you know if he's guilty? And who is trying him anyway? It's just questions after questions after questions, and then the story ends on a fizzle, and then we time jump however many years, and now all of a sudden the warrior is president. Like, what's the tissue here? Like, what is happening? And it's not even like, if I was really invested in the characters, if I was really invested in this new version of the Time War and these new characters, these questions would be really interesting. But it's questions without character. Or at least the characters aren't allowed to shine and flesh themselves out, because it's not really letting the audience settle on what's actually happening. Like, it's rather than this is an alternate time war, it's more interested in, here's an alternate time war, and here's the cause and effect, the causus nexus, the paradoxes, because that's the least interesting part about it, really. Like, that's not why you go into What Ifs. It would be like if the Marvel's What If series, basically, like, rather than Captain Carter trying to kick ass with Nazis, and there's the Steve Rogers in the Iron Man suit and stuff, it's like, oh, something's gone wrong here, and the Watcher is just stepping in every 30 seconds trying to explain why it's different. Like, that's not the appeal of What If stories. It kind of borrows the aesthetics and some of the experimental aspects from the older Unbound releases, but rather than running with the interesting character dynamics and running with the world building, it's more interested in the nuts and bolts of it. And in my opinion, that's the least interesting part about What If stories. Like, the novelty is the selling point, but you've got the characters in new settings, new characterizations, new versions that we have to keep the audience up to date with. And it's just not really interested in that, from my take, really. Honestly, I kind of had high expectations for this, and maybe the upcoming one, Destiny, which comes out in September, with we don't have story details or writers and any other cast with the exception of Colin Baker announced here, so we don't really know what direction it's going in. Hopefully, this is where all of the character is. But I think you maybe should have opened with that. I don't know, I just think that there's so much being left on the table, where you've got actors like Rebecca Knight, and you've got actors like I said, Sanjeev Bhaskar that's like out of the box, creative, clever casting for Barusa. That's great. Temp as well. What if we spent 3 hours on exposition? Yeah, what if we spent 3 hours on exposition, but the exposition that we do have leaves the audience completely in the dark, and then for the next hour, we're just going to ignore it anyway? I don't know, it feels so oddly formed. I don't know, it felt like homework. I'm sorry, it felt like homework. Like, I was wanting Colin Baker as the Ward, and he's terrific. Colin Baker is so interesting and different and fun and great. Like, you heard that clip. And the opening is great. The opening, like, 10 minutes, 20 minutes of Dust Devil, brilliant. But it just becomes homework. and I'm not, I don't listen to Doctor Who Big Finish for homework. I listen to Doctor Who Big Finish for new takes, for character redemptions and stuff that we didn't get on TV, or just solid stories with solid characters. And Unbound Doctor of War 1: Genesis, I'm sorry I didn't get it. I didn't get it with this. I might get it with Unbound Doctor of War 2: Destiny, but maybe you should have opened with that. Maybe you should have opened with setting the audience into this world, and then if you had to do the nuts and bolts, you do it in the follow-up. Now, there's some great Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant stuff in Dust Devil, but even then, the last 10 minutes sets up an interesting new status quo for the Time War, and then we go to Aftershocks and it's gone. Like, what? What is this? Like, what? I can't settle or get invested in this new what-if strand, and then all of a sudden we just drop it and go to the next one. It's not a rewarding listen. And I don't like being negative here, I promise I don't, but I wasn't a fan of this release, I'm sorry. And as someone who has recently listened to a load of the Unbound stuff from early days of Big Finish, that one's way more interesting. And it utilizes the premise more effectively, even though I do think that conceptually, the Sixth Doctor is now the new War Doctor because of an altered start of the Time War. That's a great idea. The execution, just not there, in my opinion. If you're on the fence about this premise, about this concept, I'd say wait. I think that there's like a terrific First Doctor box set that came out this month that you can get, The Outlaws. That's great. But yeah, maybe wait and see how it sticks the landing for Destiny in September. I'll let you know how that goes when it happens in September. But as for now, this for me is kind of a safe skip unless it sticks the landing properly. But even if, for example, Destiny is an amazing thriller ride with great characters and stuff, Genesis still seems like something you might be able to skip because it just can't settle on a status quo. Yeah, disappointing. And as somebody mentioned in the chat, JM97, at least the artwork is cool. The artwork is great. The artwork is terrific. Claudia Gironi does incredible artwork. You've seen what they've done for 10th Doctor Classic Companions. Waterworld, this comes out next month. I'm looking forward to that. If you are a Colin Baker completionist, or if a captivating performance from a Doctor can carry you through a box set, Genesis has got you covered. But for anyone else, I think you can steer clear for now. Maybe Destiny will justify it, but for Genesis for now, I think it's kind of safe to skip it.